The number was $312,000. I remember staring at the paper my father slid across the table like it was a restaurant check. White cardstock, printed in a clean, professional font, line items going all the way down the page. Diapers, formula, elementary school tuition. Piano lessons I quit after 3 months because I hated it. Every single thing had a dollar amount next to it. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I thought they would. I looked up at my father, then at my mother, then at my sister sitting next to her, with this small smile she was trying to hide. The kind of smile you wear when you've been waiting a long time for something, and it's finally happening. There were 83 people in that restaurant. My aunt from Phoenix, who I hadn't seen since I was 12. My cousins who drove up from Atlanta. Family friends I barely recognized. My grandmother, who was 81 years old and hard of hearing, sitting at the head of the long table in her good pearls because she thought we were celebrating my promotion. We were not celebrating my promotion. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old. I'm a forensic auditor, which means my entire job is finding the thing people try to hide. I've sat across the table from CFOs who cook the books for 6 years and watched them sweat while I walk them through their own spreadsheets. I know how to keep my face completely still when what I'm reading makes me want to put my fist through a wall. That skill saved me that night. I need to go back a little. Because if I just tell you about the dinner, you won't understand how we got there. I grew up in a house that looked normal from the outside. Nice neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. 2-car garage. My father is an attorney, corporate law, very successful, the kind of man who has his suits dry cleaned twice a week. My mother sits on the board of 2 nonprofits and chairs the annual gala committee at our church. From the outside, we were the family other families admired. From the inside, I was always slightly off to the side of it. My sister Dana is 4 years younger than me. She was the one my parents talked about at dinner parties. Not in a cruel way. They weren't cruel, not openly. But Dana was the story they wanted to tell. She was prettier in the way that gets noticed, easier in the way that gets loved, and somewhere along the way I understood that my role in the family was to be competent, not celebrated, useful. I was fine with that. I made my peace with it. I went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship, worked 2 jobs to cover the rest, graduated with honors, got my CPA, then my CFE. I built something for myself that had nothing to do with them, and I was proud of it. I moved to Chicago at 26. I was making good money by 28. Not wealthy, but comfortable. My own apartment, my own car, my own savings account that I checked every Sunday morning with a cup of coffee, like a small ritual of proof that I had made it. I sent money home sometimes, not because they asked at first. My grandmother's medical bills one year, my mother's car repair when she said money was tight. 500 here, 1,000 there. It felt like the right thing to do. The asks got more regular around the time I turned 30. My father called it family investment. He'd say things like, "You're doing so well, Claire, and we've always supported you," which would be followed very shortly by a number. I told myself it was temporary. Their firm had a slow quarter. The market was rough. There was always a reason that sounded reasonable in the moment. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no idea about, was what was happening with Dana. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The promotion my grandmother thought we were celebrating was real. I'd just been named a senior director at my firm, which came with a salary that made me quietly emotional in my car after the meeting. I called my mother that evening, excited in a way I hadn't let myself be in a long time. She said, "That's wonderful, honey. We should all get together to celebrate." I should have noticed that she said we should all get together, rather than "I'm so proud of you." But I was happy, and when you're happy you hear what you want to hear. She called back 2 days later and told me she'd reserved a private dining room at a restaurant downtown Columbus. "The whole family wants to celebrate with you," she said. "Your grandmother is so excited." I drove down from Chicago on a Friday afternoon. 3.5 hours. I listened to a podcast about behavioral economics and thought about my new office and felt, genuinely, like maybe things between us were shifting. Like maybe the promotion was the thing that would finally make them look at me the way they looked at Dana. I walked into that restaurant in a new dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Navy blue. I'd gotten my hair done that morning. My grandmother waved at me from across the room and pointed at me proudly to the person sitting next to her. That image, that specific image of her pointing at me with her good pearls on. I've thought about it a lot since then. My father stood up when I came in. He hugged me. My mother kissed my cheek. Dana was already there, sitting next to my mother, and she hugged me too, and everything looked exactly like a celebration. We had appetizers. We had wine. I made the rounds saying hello to aunts and cousins I hadn't seen in years. My grandmother held my hand for a long time and told me she'd always known I would do great things. Then, about 45 minutes in, my father stood up and tapped his glass. I thought he was going to make a toast. He said, "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. We've been looking forward to this for a long time." He paused, and I remember thinking the pause was strange. Too long. Too loaded for a birthday toast. "Claire, sweetheart, can you come up here?" I walked up to the front of the room. 83 people were looking at me. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to me. "We've given this a lot of thought," he said, "and we felt this occasion was the right time." I opened the envelope. The paper inside had our family's home address at the top, printed formally, like a legal document. Which is, in a sense, what it was. Because what my father had handed me in front of my grandmother and my aunts and my cousins and the family friends who had known me since I was in pigtails was an itemized invoice for my childhood, $312,000. Due in 30 days. I read every line. I did not look up. I needed a moment to understand what was actually in my hands, because my brain kept rejecting it. Prenatal care, $4,200. Hospital delivery, $11,500. Infant formula, months 1-8, $960. It went on like that. Every year of school. Every doctor's visit. 2 years of therapy I'd had at 15, after a difficult period they had encouraged me to get. That was on there too. $3,400. At the bottom, in a separate section, were more recent items. It took me a moment to understand what I was reading. Wire transfers, dates and amounts. Money I had sent home, but more than I had sent. A lot more. The document listed $89,000 in family loans extended on Claire's behalf. I had not borrowed $89,000. I had never agreed to any loan. I looked up at my father. He said, "We've always been there for you, Claire. And now that you're successful, we think it's time to formalize what the family has invested in you over the years." The room was very quiet. My mother was nodding slowly, like a mediator who had already rehearsed this. Dana was looking at her lap. I have replayed what happened in the next 60 seconds many times. What I said, what I didn't say. I folded the paper and put it back in the envelope. I said, "I need some air," and I walked out of the private dining room, through the main restaurant, and out the front door. It was 38 degrees in Columbus that night. I stood on the sidewalk in my navy blue dress with no coat, and I called my best friend Priya in Chicago. She answered on the second ring. I read her the total. She said, "Stay on the phone with me." I stood there for probably 10 minutes while she talked me through breathing. Then I called my attorney. He didn't answer, so I left a voicemail that was much calmer than I felt. Then I went back inside. My father was still standing at the front of the room. The appetizer plates had been cleared. Nobody seemed to have moved. I sat back down at my seat. I picked up my wine glass. I took one sip. I said, "I'd like to enjoy dinner. We can talk about this afterward." And here is the thing about being a forensic auditor. The job teaches you to never show your hand before you understand the full picture. I didn't understand the full picture yet, but I was starting to. Because that $89,000 in loans extended on my behalf, I knew exactly how much money I had sent home over the past 4 years. I kept records. I keep records of everything. And the number my record showed was $34,500. Not $89,000. $54,500 was missing, and someone had created documentation claiming I had received it. I ate my dinner. I was polite. I asked my grandmother about her garden. I told my cousin about Chicago. I smiled at appropriate intervals. And the entire time, something very cold and very quiet was organizing itself in my mind. The drive back to my hotel took 7 minutes. I sat in the parking lot with my laptop open until 2 in the morning. I am very good at my job. What that means, in practical terms, is that I know exactly what to look for and exactly what to look. By midnight, I had pulled every record I had of every transfer I'd made to my parents over the past 4 years. By 1 a.m., I had cross-referenced the dates and amounts against the document my father had handed me. By 2, I had found the discrepancy that explained the extra $54,500. 3 separate transfers had been made to my parents' account from a routing number I recognized, because it was a joint account I had once shared with my mother for exactly 6 months when I first moved to Chicago, and she had asked to be added in case of emergency. I had removed myself from that account when I moved banks, or I had thought I did. I looked at the transfer dates. All 3 were within the past 14 months. I called Priya again. It was 2:15 in the morning. She answered. They didn't close the account, I said. She was quiet for a moment. How much? $54,500 in 3 transfers. She said a word I won't repeat here. I want to tell you that I cried. I think that would make more sense, that I sat in that parking lot and cried. But I didn't. I felt something, but it wasn't grief, and it wasn't rage. It was closer to clarity. The kind of clarity you get when a set of numbers you couldn't reconcile finally resolves into a pattern that makes complete sense. This was why the asks had gotten more regular. This was why my father had started calling them investments. They needed a framework that justified what they had already done, and they had decided that framework was a debt. If I owed them $312,000, then any money they had taken was merely a down payment on what was rightfully theirs. I slept for 4 hours. I woke up and called my attorney at 8 a.m. His name is David Park. He's been my attorney for 3 years, and he is extremely unflappable, which is what I need in an attorney. I told him everything. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Send me everything you have before noon." I sent him 22 files. He called me back at 2 p.m. He said, "Claire, this is wire fraud. This is not a civil matter. This is a federal crime." I knew that. I had known that since approximately 1:30 in the morning. But hearing him say it made it real in a different way. He also said, "Before we do anything, I want you to get into your old bank account, the joint one, and pull every statement going back to when you think you removed yourself from it." It took me 3 days to get everything David needed. I drove back to Chicago on Sunday. I did not go back to the restaurant. I did not respond to my father's text, which came Sunday morning and said, "Claire, we should talk through this as a family. No need to involve outside parties." Outside parties. That's what he called David. There was also a text from my mother that said, "We love you, sweetheart. We just want what's best for all of us." And one from Dana. Dana said, "I didn't know they were going to do it like that. I'm sorry." I read that text probably 20 times over the following week. I didn't know they were going to do it like that. Not, I didn't know they were going to do it like that. A very specific distinction. I called Dana on a Tuesday, 11 days after the dinner. She answered, and there was a long pause, and then she said, "Claire, I'm really sorry." "I know," I said, "but I need to understand what you knew." What she told me over the next hour rearranged several things I had believed about my family for my entire adult life. Dana had been present for conversations about the investment document for over a year. She had been told it was a legal strategy, that my father, as an attorney, had determined that formalizing our family's financial relationship was standard practice. She hadn't known about the unauthorized transfers, or she said she hadn't. I believe her mostly. Dana has always been the kind of person things happen around without her fully understanding how. But she also said, very quietly, near the end of the call, "They told me that if this worked, they were going to set up a fund for my wedding. That's why I didn't say anything." I was quiet for a moment. "Dana," I said, "the money they were going to use for your wedding was my money." She started crying. I let her. I didn't say anything else. What happened next happened over about 4 months, and I will try to give you the relevant parts without making this longer than it needs to be. David filed a report with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. This is not a fast process. Nothing about it is fast. There were weeks where nothing seemed to be moving, and I went to work and came home and cooked dinner and tried not to refresh my email every 20 minutes. My father called me 6 times in the first month. I did not answer. He left 2 voicemails. The first one said they wanted to resolve this privately. The second one said he was willing to adjust the document to reflect a more accurate accounting. I sent both voicemails to David without responding. My mother sent a card, an actual card, in the mail, with a watercolor bird on the front. Inside, she had written, "Family is forever, Claire. I hope you remember that." I photographed it and added it to the file. The investigation took the time it took. I cooperated completely. I provided every document David and I had assembled, plus additional records the investigators requested. The bank confirmed that my name had never been fully removed from the joint account due to an administrative error, and that the 3 transfers had been initiated from my father's computer using login credentials that should not have had access to that account. My father, who is a corporate attorney, had made a very significant mistake. He had documented everything: the invoice, the line items, the dates. Attorneys are trained to create paper trails, and he had created an extraordinarily thorough one that now explained exactly how he had planned to justify money he had taken without my permission. On a Wednesday morning in March, approximately 5 months after that dinner, my father was arrested at his office. I found out from David, who called me at 10:14 a.m. I was in a meeting. I stepped out into the hallway and stood by the window that looks out over the river and listened to David tell me that federal agents had executed a search warrant at my father's firm. I said, "Okay." He said, "Are you okay?" I thought about it. "Yes," I said. "I think so." I went back into my meeting. I presented a quarterly discrepancy report to a room full of people who had no idea what had just happened. I did my job. At 5 o'clock, I went home, changed into comfortable clothes, and called Priya. She said, "Tell me everything." I did. Then I ordered Thai food and watched a documentary about deep-sea fish, because sometimes after a very large thing happens, you need to watch something that has nothing to do with anything. My father's case is ongoing. I'm not going to discuss the details because David has asked me not to. What I can tell you is that the unauthorized transfers were confirmed. What I can tell you is that the document they handed me at that dinner, the $312,000 invoice, has been described by the investigators as evidence of intent. What I can tell you is that my grandmother called me in February, and she wept, and she told me she had no idea. I believe her completely. She is 81 years old, and she was wearing her good pearls because she thought we were celebrating my promotion. I told her I knew she didn't know. I told her I loved her. I meant it. Dana and I have spoken 4 more times since that Tuesday call. I don't know what we are to each other right now. I don't know if what she did, not warning me, accepting what they offered in exchange, can be folded back into a sisterhood I can recognize. I'm not there yet. I'm trying to be honest with myself about what I want, rather than what I think I should want. What I know is this. There's a version of that night where I fall apart in front of 83 people, where I cry or scream or say something I can't take back, where I hand them the reaction they were counting on, because I think now they were counting on a reaction. A public breakdown would have been useful to them. It would have established a narrative: unstable daughter, generous parents, very unfortunate situation. Instead, I folded the paper. I went outside. I called Priya. I came back in and ordered the salmon. I am very good at my job, and the job, at its core, is this: find what's hidden, document what's real, and let the numbers tell the truth. $312,000 was what they thought they were owed. $54,500 was what they took. Those 2 numbers tell you everything you need to know about my family, and everything you need to know about why I walked out of that restaurant with my evidence and my composure and my entire career pointing exactly in the right direction. I still have the invoice. I keep it in a manila folder in my desk drawer. Not out of bitterness, though. I'd understand if you thought that. I keep it because I want to remember what it felt like to read it and choose in that moment, not to react. I smile when I think about that now. Not a mean smile. I know who I am. I know what I built. I know that no one, not my father with his suits and his legal documents, not my mother with her watercolor birds and her nonprofit galas, not my sister with her careful apologies, can put a price on that. $312,000. That's what they thought I was worth to them. They were off by a lot. I've thought a lot about what made that night survivable, not the legal strategy. That came later. Not David's phone calls or the FBI's timeline or the 22 files I sent before noon on a Monday. Before any of that, there was just me on a sidewalk in 38-degree weather in a dress I'd bought to celebrate something good, and the choice I made in that moment about what kind of person I was going to be when everything I thought I knew turned out to be wrong. I chose to go back inside. I chose the salmon. I chose to ask my grandmother about her garden and listen to her answer like it was a normal night. People ask me how I did that, and I don't have a clean answer. I think it comes down to this. I had spent 32 years being the competent one, the quiet one, the one who handled things. For once, that was exactly the right thing to be. What my father didn't understand, what I don't think he ever understood about me, is that there's a difference between being quiet and being weak. He mistook my steadiness for submission. He saw someone who didn't make scenes and decided that meant someone who wouldn't fight back. He was wrong about that in a way that cost him significantly. The thing about actions that are built on dishonesty is that they require constant maintenance. You have to keep the story straight. You have to make sure the documents line up. You have to count on the other person, never looking too closely. My father is an attorney. He knows this. And still, he left a paper trail so thorough that the investigators thanked me for how organized my records were. He documented his own intent. That's what happens when someone is so convinced of their own authority that they stop being careful. I think about Dana sometimes. I think about her sitting at that table, knowing something was coming and saying nothing, and I try to hold two things at once: that she is my sister and that she made a choice. Both things are true. I'm not ready to pretend the choice didn't happen, and I'm not ready to cut her off entirely either. I'm somewhere in the middle of that, and I'm trying to be honest about where I actually am rather than where I think I should be. What I keep coming back to is something simple: the work I did on myself, the degree I paid for, the certifications I earned at night after long days, the job I'd built from nothing in a city where nobody knew my name. None of that could be taken from me. They took money. They tried to take my credibility. They handed me a document that said my entire existence had been a financial burden, and they wanted it repaid. But the thing that got me out of that room and out of that situation and into a position where the truth could be verified and documented and presented to people whose job it is to act on it, that was mine. That was built by years of showing up and doing the work and becoming someone who knows exactly what to look for. I still have the invoice in my desk drawer. $312,000. I look at it sometimes when I need to remember something important, that the people who underestimate you are usually the ones who never watched you closely enough to know what you were building. They weren't watching. I was.